A song taken from Chris Kerb, a liar. Ke nako ya gore mo nakong ya gompieno ke go laletse o le moreetsi wa Duma FM gore o nne le yone tsono ya gore wa kgele mo ileng gore mo go sentseng se buiwa mo nakong ya gompieno gore should the public have a say mo budget speeching ya rona ga ke itse o le moreetsi gore o e seka ka tsela ntseng ya ga mo le gape re utwa tsone dikgang tse eleng gore batho ba bana le mahatha a bone ba ya ba lebile yone budget speech ga ke itse gore o le moreetsi wa Duma FM o e bona jang kganye wa dumela kana ga o dumele gore batho ba tshwantse gore ba hiwe sone sebaka sa gore ba kgele kana ba dire ditshwelo ka eleng gore yone budget a rona e ta entse ka teng. SMS line ya rona ya bereka 76281885 o ka ntshwara hela mo nakong ya gampieno ga ile gore ga gona sepe re ta bo re tswella ka thulaganyo ya rona re toga re tswala yone puisano ya rona mo nakong ya gompieno ta bo re ga bone ba ileng gore ke ba bora governmente metsotso hela e ka nna meraro mo le mongwe a bone gore ba digele thulaganyo go le ba ga ile gore Botswana ga ba batle go buisana le rona kana gongwe dikgang tse di buang ke dikgang tse gore di thata mo go bone ga ke itse mme ntle le go dia nako ke ta boela go bone ba governmente ke simole hela ka ene Humphrey bose kra re bose you have 3 minutes to wrap up your arguments.
Yes, it concerns me that a Botswana kid would not think we have problems in the status quo about the budget speech. But over and above that, I'll look at this debate in two ways. Firstly, is it a legitimate tool to use? Secondly, will it be effective? Let's look at the idea of legitimacy. Now, as the argument that we got from the opposition against this, they said people will be irrational because being involved in something too much, you become selfish about a class of judgment. We think this is a somewhat counterintuitive argument, given that they trust the same people to vote for a government. What isn't that irrationality gone then, if they believe it so? But also, we think that people in the government can also be selfish and use those funds for their own interests. We think it harms the people. Secondly, they tell you about the tyranny of the majority to the minority if we make a vote. That isn't an argument entirely against the voting system. It's perhaps an argument why we need to mitigate against that harm with other policies, maybe affirmative action of some sort to the minority of some sort, right? Then thirdly, they talk about people would vote based on want, not need. I don't think that any individual in their rightful mind will choose to not have food rather than having some clothes or anything. But even if we're to consider that those people, we think that by and large, they're a significant minority. The majority of people are rational enough to recognize their needs before their wants. We think that's more important. What we bring to you on opening government for this in favor of why it's legitimate is to show you the extent to which the public is a major stakeholder into this. We brought you an extensive analysis of how the budget actually translates to the basic life that you live every day. We think that in a democratic society that is premised on you having an influence in things that affect your daily life, this legitimizes you having the right to vote on that thing, right? In the first thing. Then let's go to the question, will it be effective in what it seeks to do? Now, the only argument that we got from them was the idea of deadlock, that we spend time. In fact, we think that is an argument in our favor because we'd rather have a protracted time of more criticism and better analysis to produce something that is better tailor-made for the society to deal with the problems that they have than to only rush in time in creating something that is out of touch with what people need. Because we think that the government becomes effective when it meets the needs of those that it gains legitimacy from. And the government gains legitimacy from the public, and we think that's what it ought to prioritize. But over importantly, we told you that massive consultation before the budget speech comes out means people are better informed about what they need to be voting upon, and therefore that is massive flow of information that we currently don't have. But also it makes people compromise because they'll know I voted for something like this, therefore I can make trade-offs. But also it fosters criticism that we think improves the budget and make it tailor-made for the people. But over and above that, Mr. Speaker, we think this actually involves people in a massive way, and that's what democracy is about. In conclusion, it's legitimate. They haven't shown you why it isn't legitimate. But secondly, it will be effective because it's a tool that gives best delivery of services and goods in our society.
Thank you, sir. That was Humphrey Bose. The output is content that the people should be consulted yaanong tabo ke from the opposition side, and inviting Onika Ntsija to respond.
I think everybody who's listening to the debate at home will pretty much agree with me that this is such a controversial government. Never have I had a government that stands to represent the needs of the people, but yet makes statements such as, yeah, it's okay when students flock to the finance offices and the workers and they strike, it's okay, just as long as at the end of the day the budget speech is objective. I mean, what kind of governments actually, calls for disorder and havoc in their own country? We feel like this is something that is flawed and is something that needs to be paid attention to, because these tendencies of this government today are just out of order. And then they tell us that, it doesn't even matter when the budget speech takes a little while to be released, just as long as it's objective. But the question is, objective to who? To the one whose budget has been increased. What about the one whose budget hasn't moved or hasn't had an improvement? He also still feels like it isn't objective. So we tell you that if you're going to go with the views of the population, we'll never actually reach a decision that is objective to everyone. But when we as the government, find where the resources need to go the most, and we go with that analysis, then we tell you that is where the objectivity is going to come from, because nobody's selfish needs is being represented in the budget speech. And then I asked Chief a point of information. This was in response to his argument to say public is such a big stakeholder, why not engage them? I told him that, Chief, already after the budget speech has been released, what happens is that the people have different platforms to express themselves. The newspaper coverage, even social networks such as Facebook, the TV, everything. We always get reactions of Botswana about the budget speech. So we don't see why he feels why now we need to call for such a law where they need to actually approve before it's released, because already in the status quo there is that system where now the finance office can actually derive the views of the people from the media. And then he talks about he says media does not cover everyone. But if people right now in the status quo actually don't even vote, then what gives you confidence that they're going to actually all flock together and go and vote on the budget speech? Tell you that majority of the people don't even listen to the budget speech anyways, because they don't even understand it. So we tell you that we have a voter apathy in system already. So how are you going to ensure that actually everybody, because you're saying you want to cover everybody's needs, how are you going to make sure that everybody votes on the budget speech? So they say that the government can also be selfish. So we don't see how this whole argument of selfishness comes in. We tell that the reason why there are checks and balances in place is to do away with the selfishness of government officials. Now we tell you that the budget speech, before it's been released, it has to go through a number of stages, and this is to just ensure that there's no selfishness, and this is to ensure that there's legitimacy. And we tell you that from this legitimacy, that is where the government gains its legitimacy from. We don't think that the public has been shut out. There are different platforms that they can express themselves. However, we just don't think them approving the budget speech is the right way to go. With that, I'm Onika Ntsija, and I'm supremely proud to oppose. Thank you.
Supremely proud to oppose go heta ene jalo Onika Ntsija Khosi. Re tla re boela mo go bora goromente go ruta gore ba ikarabela ka tseleng tsenjang. Onika ga dumele tota gore the public can never see mo go yone budget ga ba dumele ba gana ba tshikinya thogo. Ke ta utwa jalo re Khosi morimong tsa gore ke di biditse sente gampeno right. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this side of the House is typical of most oppositions. All they can ever do is say no, no, and offer zero solutions.
Sure.
The only solution that she comes up with that people have a problem is for them to go on Facebook. Now, we don't think that this is enough, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that the government budget affects individuals' daily lives. More importantly, that they should just post something on Facebook about it. Anyway, now on this first idea that they brought up, that criticism isn't bad. This is so contradictory to your whole case. Because if it isn't that bad, then what harm is it in letting people do something about it? And secondly, if your problem is that criticism is so bad, you're the same people that are telling us that people can be criticized on Facebook. The contradictory nature of your arguments shows that you guys don't realize the nature of the demographics involved. which is why you keep singling out guys like alcoholics and whatever, right? We think this is silly because they're not the only people in society, and we're not only taking votes from alcoholics. So like, bring the alcoholics, I'll bring the teachers and the students. Right? On the second thing, they say that people are inherently selfish and, that's why you can't get them to make decisions or whatever. Two responses to this. First of all, it's silly for you to think that people are selfish and can't make rational votes when these are the same people you entrust to vote in this government. So we don't see why that vote is any differently, right? And secondly, if your argument is that people are selfish, by your own admission, most governments work so that they can be re-elected. So what are they going to do? The most selfish things they want, And then what is another glaringly big problem about your case is that you guys seem to think that people are going to be making decisions and all these alcoholics are going to say, listen guys, now let's bring down the price of alcohol. But then by your guys' own admission, there's a rigorous discussion that takes place. What is the harm in letting these people be involved in that discussion? Because at the end of the day, they're not going to make a decision and tear down the price of alcohol. They're just going to let their opinions be heard. So we don't see what harm you guys have stated about in listening to different people's opinions, right? Now, we think that when government departments are spending millions on luxury cars and people in the CKGR don't have basic amenities like water and power, we need to be able to say something about it. When the government keeps buying fighter jets and students are continually failing every year at school, it's not enough for us to open groups on Facebook and say this is bad. We need to be able to do something before this actually happens, right? And your whole problem that people are somehow going to strike and do all of these things only happen when people feel like they're not being consulted. If you let people vote, if you let the demographic into the decision-making process, we don't see why they'd be angry. And then on your last idea that people don't give a damn whether or not to vote and you're going to encourage them, look, this is an argument for why you need to have better mechanisms to discourage voter apathy. We don't see what the difficulty and the problem is in allowing these people to have a say in what the budget is. We're proud to be this government.
Go heta jalo ene khosi morema. Khosi moremo. They are proud to be the government. Rata gore digala thulaganyo rata. O tsena mo from the opposition side, we'll be having a red solofelo. Mojamorago re tso ke khosi a go dire.
All right. Thank you so much. Now, anyone even remotely conversant with Botswana economic policy will be able to tell you that in 2011, the International Monetary Fund published an article to say that Botswana's public service is too expensive for us to be able to maintain for the next 10 years. They recommended to the government that they need to retrench civil servants so as to save money. The Botswana government decided they didn't want to retrench civil servants because they thought it was in the best in the interest of the public to keep people at work. The same civil servants went on strike and wanted hikes in salaries. If we employ these guys' policy, this means the civil servants would have got hikes in their salaries. This means that the country's economic situation would have been even worse. Why? Because people are deciding based on a decision metric that is selfish to what I need in the short term, not looking at what they need in the long run. We think this is really problematic, right? I'm going to look at the two things they needed to prove and how they didn't prove them. The first thing they needed to prove is that being a stakeholder makes you the best decision maker. We've given you lots of lines of argumentation why this just isn't true. Why when you decide looking at an individual metric, when you decide looking at self, there are more problems that arise. Case in point, we could arise conflicts within society where the South prioritizes one thing and the North prioritizes another, because what happens in that situation is someone has to win. When someone wins, that means someone is disgruntled. So if the South wins, the North is disgruntled, you're causing conflict and tensions between the two sides of Botswana. We believe that this is extremely problematic. The second thing they needed to prove is that certain decisions won't suffer based on the selfish metric we've been talking about. So things like that the public doesn't prioritize, Things like international relations, which need a budget. Things like the army, which need a budget. What the public doesn't prioritize, those things will suffer because the public is prioritizing other things. We think that's problematic. They keep asking this whole thing about how can they vote for government but you don't allow them to vote for the budget. There's a difference, Mr. Speaker, between voting on a government and voting on money. Money is a more immediate selfish incentive to make a decision based on self than governance is. This is why we inherently believe that the decision that comes about because of money will be a selfish and therefore bad decision. The third thing, decisions need to be objective, and the government is the best objective body to do this. This is what we believe, that we need someone who has an eagle-eyed view of what's going on in the country, having consulted with who they consult with to make decisions on our behalf. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the point they keep rubbishing of non-timeless budgets. They say that time isn't a factor. This means that they don't understand governance at all. Because if time isn't a factor and we don't pass a budget, this means that things like medicine can't be bought. People don't get their ARVs and people die. This means things like books can't be bought. The school curricula can't be started and children can't go to school. Not having a timeless budget is a bigger problem than they would have you believe. Mr. Speaker, we are supremely proud to oppose.
Go heta ene ya lo solofelo ba gana nyang wa banyana ba tshinya togo ba re government yone e leng gore e na le one maikarabelo a go bona gore budget ya lehatsi e dirisiwa ka tsela ntseng yang gore government o mo seemong se se botoka go tsaya ditshwetso tse di maleba go na le ha go dikatsa wa jalo ke batho the public as individuals. Buma maitsho le borraitso ta ke tsentse ba ka se ke le boga go bo le kgane go tsamaela ka kwana tsa gore mo biking e tang ta brentse re le mo.
Thank you.
Dalo. Radio Duma FM nako metsotso e methango hela go togela nako ya lesome le bongwe me ta ke boeka ha ke no mitsi re mo go re tswela le thulaganyo ganye re sa tsong go bua ka yone re ta re tswe le disa ke solohetsa hano moeteledipele wa the president of Botswana movement for democracy youth league a re phenya se go gore ta re buisana ka yone budget e ta go logola gore mo ke ke ta buisana go ga re ta bona yone budget speech brief case ba re mathambo gore bo re tshwaretse